The billionaire collapsed just steps away from a hot dog stand, and only two little girls stopped. Everyone else kept walking. Everyone else looked away. But these two, with paper phones, tiny shoes, and hearts too big for their age, they didn't run. They saved him. And what happened next will restore your faith in what it means to be human. If this story touches your heart, please hit subscribe. Your one click means the world to our small channel. Nathaniel Brooks didn't know he was dying. The morning had started, as most of his mornings did, with a tight calendar and an even tighter jaw. He was dressed in a charcoal gray suit that had never seen a wrinkle, his Italian shoes clicking rhythmically against the pavement just inside the eastern edge of Central Park. The July sun filtered through the trees above him, casting fractured light on the path below. To everyone else, he looked like a man in control. But beneath the lapel of his blazer, the ECG monitor patch he'd reluctantly agreed to wear 2 weeks ago was flashing red. That morning, just an hour before, a doctor had called. The voice on the other end had been gentle, measured, sterile. "Mr. Brooks, the tests are conclusive. Your cardiac arrhythmia is worsened by stress, and the hormonal levels confirm what we suspected. I'm afraid natural conception isn't possible." The word impossible had landed like a rock in his stomach. Nate had simply said, "Thank you," and hung up. Then, instead of taking the usual route, black SUV, private elevator, espresso in hand, he dismissed his driver and told his assistant not to follow up. He needed to walk. He told himself it was for the air, the quiet, a few unscheduled steps. But in truth, something inside him was starting to fray. It wasn't just the diagnosis or the pain in his chest. It was the weight of everything he had built and everything he didn't have. He passed a jogger, a dog walker, a man selling hot dogs near the 72nd Street entrance. The man behind the cart didn't look up. No one did. And then, right near a bend in the path where the trees curved inward and the traffic noise faded into birdsong, his chest seized. Not the sharp pain of fear, not the burn of indigestion. No, this was thunder. He stopped walking. The world around him wavered. The trees blurred. His knees buckled. One hand gripped the iron railing along the path. The other clutched his chest. He gasped. Once, twice. Then everything went dark. His body hit the pavement with a soundless thud. People walked past. A woman on the phone glanced over, then kept going. A teenager skateboarding barely missed his legs and shouted something obscene without looking back. To the world, Nate Brooks had disappeared. But to two small girls with tangled curls and plastic shoes, he was the only thing that mattered. Grace Carter was the first to notice him. She and her twin sister Sophie were walking hand in hand along the same path, a path they had taken many times before with their grandmother. But today, Grandma Martha had been too tired. She'd looked at them with worn eyes and said, "You girls know the way?" "Go on." "Just like we practiced." Sophie held the small pink backpack. Grace clutched the laminated hospital ID that dangled from her neck. They were 5 years old. Grace tugged Sophie's arm. "He's on the ground," she whispered. The man in the suit wasn't moving. His face was pale. His hands looked strange, open, limp. Sophie stepped forward the way she had seen her mom do in old videos when she was still working as a doctor. "Sir?" she asked, her voice small. No response. Sophie reached into her backpack and pulled out a bright pink toy-like phone worn around the edges. It was a real phone, programmed with only 4 numbers: Grandma, Nurse, 911, Hospital. She pressed the big green button marked Help. The dispatcher's voice came fast. "This is 911. Are you in danger?" Sophie didn't blink. "There's a man lying down in the park. We think he's sick. He's not waking up." "Is he breathing?" "I think... not right." "Can you tell me your name?" "I'm Sophie. This is my sister, Grace." "How old are you?" "5. There was a pause. "Can you stay with him?" "Yes," Sophie said firmly. And so they did. 2 little girls, one kneeling, one standing, waited beside the billionaire nobody saw fall. Within minutes, sirens sounded in the distance. Birds scattered. Joggers turned. The world finally remembered how to look. By the time the paramedics arrived, Sophie was holding Nathaniel Brooks's hand. Grace was patting his sleeve gently. The EMTs did what they always do: chest compressions, vitals, oxygen, a call to Mount Sinai's emergency wing. One of them looked down at the girls and asked, "Did you call?" Sophie nodded. "You might have saved this man's life." Sophie didn't smile. Neither did Grace. They just stood up, brushed their knees off, and continued walking toward the hospital. Meanwhile, in the back of the ambulance, Nathaniel's eyelids twitched once. A pink phone, 2 little girls, a voice saying, "We'll wait with him." That was all he remembered, and somehow it was enough. Sophie Carter didn't know what arrhythmia meant. She didn't know the name of the man in the suit or that she had just saved the life of a billionaire. She only knew that when someone stops moving, you stay. That's what her mother used to say. The toy phone had been a birthday present, but it wasn't really a toy. It had 4 buttons, big ones, each marked with a sticker: Grandma, Nurse, 911. Mount, short for Mount Sinai Hospital. Their mother, Abigail, had set it up months ago, just before the accident. She had knelt down beside Sophie and Grace and said, "This phone is only for important things, okay? Not pretend." That was the last time Sophie remembered her mother kneeling. Now the phone lived in Sophie's pink backpack, right next to the worn-out fairy tale book and a half-eaten pack of crackers. It had never been used, not until the man collapsed. After the ambulance drove off, the girls didn't cry. They didn't talk much either. They simply took the familiar path to the hospital, passing the bakery with the red awning, the mural of the lion on 5th Street, the parking lot that always smelled like gasoline. It was a 28-minute walk. They knew that because Grandma Martha had timed it once with her old wristwatch. They arrived at Mount Sinai Hospital just before 10 a.m. Inside the lobby, the security guard raised an eyebrow. "You girls again?" Sophie held up the ID badge around her neck. Grace just nodded. "They're with me," said the nurse at the check-in station, recognizing them. She led the girls to the pediatric ICU waiting room, where 2 faded couches, a vending machine, and a pile of coloring books waited like clockwork. This was their second home. Back in the emergency wing, Nathaniel Brooks was unconscious but stable. His chart read, "Patient Brooks, Nathaniel J. age, 42. Status, post-cardiac event, monitored. No known family present." The cardiologist made a note: "Unusual presentation in otherwise healthy male. Stress-induced arrhythmia. Follow-up required." No one mentioned the girls. Not yet. In the waiting room, Sophie sat with her legs crossed, slowly flipping through a book about birds. Grace curled up beside her, eyes half closed. "Sophie?" she whispered. Do you think he'll be okay?" Sophie thought about it for a while. Then she said, "I think we did what we were supposed to." Grace nodded, not fully understanding, but trusting her sister the way she always did. Across the hospital, Nate stirred for the first time. The light above his bed was dimmed. The machines beside him beeped in a rhythm that mirrored his recovering heart. He opened his eyes, then immediately winced. He felt wrecked, like someone had unplugged him and put him back together wrong. The nurse appeared at his side. "Welcome back, Mr. Brooks." He tried to speak. Nothing came out. She handed him a cup of water and waited patiently. After a sip, he rasped, "What happened?" "You collapsed in Central Park," she said gently. "You had a cardiac event, an arrhythmia. We got to you just in time." He blinked. The memory came in fragments. The railing, the spinning trees, a pink blur, a tiny voice. "Someone called 911? "Yes," the nurse smiled. "Two little girls, 5 years old from what we were told. One of them had a phone pre-programmed for emergencies. They stayed with you until the ambulance arrived." Nate stared at her. "Girls?" "Mm-hmm, twins. They didn't wait around for recognition, just walked away. Said they were on their way to visit their mom." "Where?" The nurse hesitated. "Pediatric ICU. Their mother's in a coma. Car accident about a month ago. They've been visiting every few days." Something inside Nate twisted. Back in the waiting room, Sophie was explaining something to Grace in a matter-of-fact tone. "It's called ventricular tachycardia," she said. Grace frowned. "That sounds fake." "Nope. It's when the heart goes fast and forgets how to beat right. Mommy told me once. She used to fix it with paddles." Grace looked worried. "But we didn't have paddles." Sophie shrugged. "We had the phone." Nate's assistant arrived at the hospital around noon, flustered and carrying a briefcase. "We've rescheduled the strategy call with Zurich, moved the board prep to Thursday, and—" "Stop," Nate said quietly. The assistant froze. "I want you to find out who those girls are." "What?" "The two girls who called 911. I want names. I want to thank them." The assistant looked confused. "I think one of the paramedics wrote something down." "Then start there." It took less than an hour. The paramedics' report had 2 handwritten names near the bottom: Sophie and Grace Carter, along with a phone number labeled Grandma. That was all Nate needed. He sat up slowly in bed, ignoring the stiffness in his chest. The nurse tried to protest, but he insisted. "I'm walking there. Myself." He leaned on the railing. One foot, then another. Every step sent a dull ache through his legs. But still, he walked. When he reached the waiting room, he saw them. 2 little girls sitting on a couch, side by side. Identical curls, identical dresses, slightly wrinkled. One was reading, the other swinging her feet. They looked up when he entered. For a moment, no one said anything. Then he asked gently, "Are you Sophie and Grace?" They nodded. "I think you saved my life." Sophie tilted her head. "You're the man from the park." He nodded. "I called," she said, "with the phone Mommy gave me." "I know," Nate said softly. "You were both very brave." They didn't smile. They weren't waiting for praise. They had done what needed to be done. That was all. Nathaniel Brooks had faced down senators, billionaires, and pharmaceutical giants. He once talked a hostile board out of firing him using only 5 words. He could calculate EBITDA in his head faster than most people could recite their zip code. But here, in the pale blue hallway of Mount Sinai Hospital, standing across from a pair of identical girls in hand-me-down dresses, he couldn't move. Not yet. To his left, a vending machine hummed. Inside, Rows of stale crackers and sticky juice boxes blinked under fluorescent light. His hand hovered above the buttons, though he wasn't hungry. He had come here with purpose. Resolve. But now, looking through the glass panel into the pediatric ICU waiting room, he saw them. Sophie and Grace. And something inside him faltered. They weren't heroic. They weren't glowing. They were just small. Grace had taken her shoes off. Sophie was holding a piece of paper, maybe a drawing, close to her chest. Their legs dangled off the bench, not even close to touching the floor. They looked like two children who had waited for a long time in too many cold rooms. A nurse passed by. "Mr. Brooks, do you want me to go with you?" He shook his head. "No," he said softly. "This has to be me." He stepped forward. The girls looked up. He cleared his throat. "Hi." Sophie didn't blink. Grace leaned into her sister's side. "I'm Nate," he said. "Nathaniel Brooks." Neither name seemed to register. He hesitated. I'm the man from the park." Sophie tilted her head slightly. "I know. You saved me." Grace's voice was almost a whisper. "You looked blue." Nate managed a soft smile. "That tracks." There was silence again. Then Sophie asked, "Do you feel better?" "I do," he said, voice thickening. "Because of you." He sat down slowly on the bench beside them, not too close, just enough. The air was filled with that strange hospital quiet, machines behind walls, distant beeps, the occasional cartwheel squeaking on tile. "I wanted to thank you," Nate said. "I'm not sure how." "You just said thank you," Sophie replied simply. Grace added, "Most people don't say it at all." Nate winced a little at that. The girls didn't ask who he was. They didn't ask for money or praise or stories. But then Grace held something out. A crumpled photo, slightly torn at the edges, laminated with packing tape. Nate took it gently. It was a photo of a woman, curly auburn hair, light in her eyes, arms wrapped around two toddlers in matching dresses. She was beautiful in that strong, unpolished way nurses often are. Sleeves rolled, hair tied up, smile ready. "That's our mommy," Grace whispered. "She's sleeping," Sophie added. "Not dead, just sleeping a long time." Nate blinked hard. "I'm so sorry," he murmured. "She's here." Sophie pointed across the hall to ICU room 8B. "She doesn't talk, but we talk to her." Nate followed her finger. The blinds on the door window were closed, but he imagined what was inside. Machines, tubes, that soft whooshing sound of breath that isn't quite breath. "She's strong," Grace said, her voice suddenly firmer. "She used to fix people," Sophie added, "with her hands and her eyes." "She fixed me once," Grace nodded. "When I ate a marble." Sophie nudged her. "You weren't supposed to." "I didn't know." Nate let out a quiet laugh, and they smiled faintly for the first time. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small card. No title, just his name and number. "This is for your grandma," he said. "If you ever need anything, even just snacks." Grace took it and turned it upside down, then back. "Are you a doctor?" "No," he said. build hospitals, but I never know what to do inside them. Sophie looked at him for a long moment. You did okay today. He swallowed something hard. Thank you. A few minutes passed in gentle silence. Grace leaned her head against Sophie's shoulder. Sophie stared straight ahead, eyes distant. She hasn't moved in a long time, Sophie said. Who? Mommy. Nate nodded. We talk to her anyway, Grace said. Do you think she hears us? Sophie asked, looking up at him. Nate stared into her wide, solemn eyes and whispered, I hope so. The nurse came by again. Girls, it's time for your visit. Sophie stood first. Grace followed. Do you want to come? Grace asked. Nate hesitated. Are you sure? Sophie shrugged. You're already here. He stood. His legs still hurt, his chest still ached. But his heart, that strange and tired thing, felt warmer somehow. They walked across the hall together. Sophie knocked on the glass door gently, as if waking a friend, and the nurse inside smiled, opening it just enough to let them in. The air was cooler. Machines beeped. Abigail Carter lay still on the bed, her chest rising and falling beneath a thin blanket. Her hair had lost some of its auburn glow. Her cheeks were pale, but she was there. The girls took their places, one on each side of the bed. Grace picked up a small brush and began stroking her mother's hair gently. Sophie pulled out the same bird book she'd had in the waiting room. She likes the red ones, Sophie said to Nate. Then she began to read, her little voice steady. Nate stood near the door. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just watched. As two little girls held the world together with quiet hands, and realized that this was not a tragedy. It was a kind of strength he had never known. Room 8B wasn't extraordinary. White walls, monitors that pulsed softly, a faint antiseptic smell, a window that didn't open. But for Nathaniel Brooks, it felt like the most sacred place he had ever entered. Abigail Carter lay in the center, surrounded by machines that hissed and beeped in careful rhythm. Her hands rested gently on the pale blue blanket, fingers still, one of them curled slightly inward, as if still holding something invisible. The girls had taken their usual places. Grace, on the left, was gently brushing her mother's hair. Sophie sat on the right, reading about birds, again, because, as she said, Mommy likes the ones that fly the highest. Nate stood just inside the doorway, watching a kind of love he'd never seen before. A nurse stepped in quietly, holding a clipboard. You must be Mr. Brooks. He nodded. I'm Leah. I've been on Abigail's care team since she was admitted. He looked at Abigail's still form. How is she? The nurse sighed gently. Stable, but unresponsive. Nate glanced at the heart monitor. No decline? None. That's the hopeful part. He swallowed. And the not hopeful? She hesitated. It's been 4 weeks. She suffered a traumatic brain injury. CT shows swelling has gone down, but neurological response is minimal. No voluntary movement, no verbal response. She tracks neither light nor sound. But her heart's strong. Leah nodded. Yes. Her body wants to fight. But the mind, it's quiet. Grace looked up from the bed. "Mommy's just tired," she said matter-of-factly. Sophie added, "She still hears us." Leah smiled softly. "They're the only visitors who never miss a day." "Do they know everything?" Nate asked. "No," Leah said, "but they know enough. Enough to stay." That answer landed like a stone in his chest. That night, Nate returned to his suite in Manhattan. The penthouse was cold, spotless, lifeless. He poured a glass of water, then sat at his kitchen island and opened his laptop. A name, a diagnosis, a paper trail. He wasn't the kind of man to sit and hope. He was the kind of man who acted. Abigail Carter, age 38. Occupation, emergency room physician. Elmhurst Hospital, Queens. Single mother of 2. Admitted after motor vehicle collision. Drunk driver. She was hit head-on while driving home from a late shift. No seatbelt. Airbags deployed. Skull fracture. Broken clavicle. She coded twice in the ambulance. Still, she made it. Because she always did. He kept scrolling. Hospital memos. Staff evaluations. One stood out. Dr. Carter has an uncanny ability to make people feel safe, even in chaos. She's the kind of ER doctor who holds your hand after midnight, who learns your name even when you're unconscious. She makes nurses cry at goodbye parties, the kind of doctor you never forget. Nate stared at the screen. She had spent her life saving strangers, and now no one was saving her, until her daughters did, until now. He buzzed his assistant. "I need the best neurologist in the country," he said. "Pediatric coma specialist. Private, quiet, discreet. They need to see a patient at Mount Sinai. No press, no questions." The assistant stammered, "Who's the patient?" "A woman who once held the world together with her bare hands. Now she needs a hand back." The next morning, Dr. Anne LeClaire, neurology lead at Johns Hopkins, boarded a train from Baltimore under an urgent, confidential invitation. By evening, Abigail had been transferred to a private suite on the top floor of Mount Sinai, discreetly, fully upgraded, state-of-the-art equipment humming quietly around her. The girls didn't understand why the walls were different or why the window was bigger. But Grandma Martha did. And when she saw Nathaniel waiting in the hallway, his suit jacket off, sleeves rolled, she approached him with visible hesitation. "I don't know why you're doing all this," she said, voice trembling from exhaustion. "But thank you." Nate looked at her for a long moment, and then said something even he didn't expect. "So did I." Dr. LeClaire met with the care team, reviewed all imaging, reran diagnostics. For 3 hours, she watched, scanned, whispered questions no one could answer. Then she nodded. "There's hope," she said quietly. "I've seen worse come back." "Do you think she can hear?" Nate asked. "I think her daughters believe she can," the doctor replied. "And sometimes, belief is more powerful than medicine." Later that evening, Nate returned to Abigail's room. The girls were asleep in 2 chairs near the bed, heads touching, their fingers still clutching corners of the blanket. The heart monitor glowed green and steady. Nate pulled a chair closer and sat down. "I read about you," he whispered to Abigail. "You sound like the kind of person I would have ignored in a meeting. But now I can't stop thinking about you." He looked at her hands, the same ones that had once held newborns, reset bones, stitched wounds at 3 a.m. You saved lives without ever being on a headline. And now I get to sit beside you, in silence, hoping you'll come back. He looked at the girls. They saved me. And I don't know what that makes me now, but I want to help. He paused, then said the words no one had ever heard him say aloud. I don't want to be alone anymore. In the corner of the room, one of Abigail's fingers twitched. Dr. LeClaire, reviewing monitors nearby, saw it too. She didn't say a word, just scribbled one note. Increased responsiveness. Continue stimulation. Unofficial milestone. Abigail didn't wake up. Not fully. Not yet. But something had changed. It was the way her eyelids fluttered when Sophie said her name. The way her heart rate ticked slightly upward when Grace brushed her fingers over the back of her mother's hand. The way Dr. LeClaire's notes now carried a cautious optimism. Mild reflex engagement in response to direct family stimuli. Continue daily sensory reinforcement. Emotional proximity appears meaningful. For most, these were just medical phrases. For Nathaniel Brooks, they were proof of something stirring beneath the surface, a return, however slow, from the edges of silence. He came every day now. Not in suits, not with staff, not as a CEO. Just Nate, the man with tired eyes who brought cocoa in white cups, books with bent spines, and quiet company. The hospital staff stopped asking questions. The security guard at the main entrance simply nodded and waved. The receptionist set aside extra visitor stickers without prompting. In the Carter family's world, he had gone from stranger to fixture, not because of what he gave, but because he stayed. Sophie and Grace adapted easily. Children often do. They didn't ask why he was always there. They just made space for him. They drew him into their rhythms. Morning visits before therapy rounds. Coloring time on the waiting room floor. Story time beside Abigail's bed, where all three took turns reading aloud. Sophie picked the books. Grace chose who got to voice which character. Mr. Nate always gets the dragon, Grace declared one morning. Because he talks serious, Sophie added. Serious dragons are the best kind, Nate agreed. One afternoon, while Abigail's machines beeped steadily, Nate walked into her room and found Grace writing on her mother's arm with a purple marker. He stepped forward quickly. Sweetheart. It's washable, Grace said without looking up. I checked. What are you writing? She held out her arm to show him. We're still here. Don't forget us. The words curved gently along Abigail's skin, like a message sent across a quiet ocean. Nate felt something rise in his throat. He sat down beside Grace, unable to speak. She always wrote on our lunch boxes, Grace whispered. Little notes. Like be brave today or smile with your whole face. And now you're writing back. Grace nodded, her curls bouncing slightly. Does she hear you? She doesn't have to, Grace said. She knows. Later, Sophie handed Nate a folded drawing. Crayon lines, carefully etched. It was a hospital room, messy with detail, machines, a window, 3 stick figures, one labeled Mommy, one Us, and one standing a little to the side with square glasses and a dragon tail, Mr. Nate. He laughed. I have a tail now? Only when we read, Sophie said. And when you say serious things, Grace added. Nate looked at Abigail. "She gave you something I never had," he murmured. Sophie tilted her head. "What?" "A mom who made you feel seen." That night, as he walked home through the city, Nate passed one of the buildings he owned, a luxury tower of polished glass and cold light. He remembered the groundbreaking ceremony, the press, the applause, the champagne that tasted like validation. But as he stood there now, he couldn't remember why it had ever mattered. He turned away. The next morning, Abigail twitched again. A full finger curl. A breath caught in her throat. A small, involuntary moan. Dr. LeClaire came in immediately. The girls were ushered into the hallway. Nate stayed. "She's responding," the doctor said. "Still early, still subtle, but it's more than we expected." "She's fighting," Nate whispered. "She has something to fight for," the doctor replied. That evening, Nate returned with a gift. Not expensive, just a notebook. On the first page, he wrote, "To Abigail Carter, whose daughters taught me how to stay." He placed it on the table beside her bed. Sophie and Grace added drawings inside the cover. A bird with purple wings, a heart made of two little hands, a dragon sipping cocoa. Before bedtime, Nate knelt beside the girls as they curled up on the hospital chairs under borrowed blankets. "Why do you always come back?" Grace asked. He paused. "Because you remind me how," he said. Sophie yawned. "How to what?" "How to care without being afraid." She nodded sleepily. "We're good at that." "Yes," Nate said softly. "You are." Later, when the girls were asleep, he stood beside Abigail once more. Her breathing was steady, her eyes still closed. He took her hand gently. "I don't know who you were before," he whispered, "but I know who you are now. You're their anchor, their home." He hesitated. "And maybe you're becoming mine, too." He didn't expect an answer. But her hand tightened, just barely, enough to let him know she had heard, or maybe just remembered. Either way, it was enough. The door creaked as Nate gently pushed it open. A soft jingle of bells above the frame gave away his presence. The apartment was barely 400 square feet. There were no framed photos, no fancy furniture, no scented candles. Just an old green couch with a tear down the side, a folding table covered in coloring books, and a refrigerator humming louder than it should. He stepped inside slowly, taking in the cluttered beauty of survival. Grace was sitting cross-legged on a checkered blanket on the floor, trying to glue a torn book spine with a glue stick. Sophie was on her tiptoes, reaching into the cupboard for a jar of peanut butter. She offered him a smile, like sunshine trying its best through a rain cloud. "Sorry it's messy," she said. "It's perfect," Nate answered. From the back room, Martha Carter emerged, wiping her hands on an apron. Her hair had gone fully silver, pulled back into a bun that had seen better days. Her shoulders were strong from years of labor, but her eyes were heavy. She didn't speak right away, just watched him, measured, protective. "I wasn't expecting you," she finally said. "I didn't plan to come," he answered honestly, "but I couldn't not." Martha glanced at the girls, then back to Nate. "We don't have much, Mr. Brooks, but we have each other." "I can see that. That's more than most people have." He handed her a small grocery bag. Inside, fruit, fresh bread, almond milk, and a small jar of honey. Sophie gasped. That's the expensive kind. Best for toast and storytelling, he winked. That night, Nate sat cross-legged on the floor, knees knocking against Sophie's and Grace's as they played a homemade board game drawn on cardboard. The dice was missing one corner. The rules were half invented. Nate had never laughed harder. He learned that Grace always made up new rules as she went. Sophie kept score with marshmallows. And when they both accused him of cheating like a dad, something in his chest tightened, but not in a painful way. Later, when the girls were brushing their teeth with borrowed toothbrushes from the clinic, Nate wandered into the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. Peanut butter, jelly, 1 half-empty gallon of milk, 2 days past the expiration date, 1 pack of tortillas, 4 apples. He gently shut it. I was going to ask for help with rent, Martha said quietly from behind him, but I didn't want to seem opportunistic. You wouldn't be. I should have asked sooner. She sighed. Abigail always said pride is a tightrope. Too much of it, and you fall. Too little, and you're stepped on. Nate glanced around. The cracked linoleum, the old heater with a knitted scarf draped over it to muffle the noise, the notices stacked on the counter. He asked, When's rent due? Last Friday? He nodded. Utilities? 2 months behind. He turned to her. Would you be willing to move? Martha tensed. Move? To a residence suite. One of mine. It's close to the hospital. It's furnished, safe, rent-free. We're not a charity case. No, you're not, he said gently. You're a family that deserves a little air, a little warmth, a little peace. She looked at him for a long moment. And what do you want in return? Just to stay close. She looked down at her apron, stained from apple slices and worry. Then she nodded once. The suite was on the 8th floor of a brick-lined building just 3 blocks from Central Park. The doorman opened the glass door for the Carter family with a smile that didn't match the confusion in his eyes. Nate didn't explain. He simply carried the girls' duffel bags himself. Each one was patched with iron-on stars and hand-sewn initials. Inside the apartment, the girls gasped. There was a fireplace, a real one. There were bunk beds already made up, with sheets printed in soft floral patterns. A kitchen stocked with cereal, fruit, and even cocoa mix. The bathroom had bubble bath. Martha held the wall for balance. Abigail's room was sunlit, quiet, waiting. Nate stood by the doorway as they explored. He didn't intrude, just watched. Grace came running back holding a note. It says, "Welcome home" in glitter. Sophie threw her arms around Nate without a word. He knelt down, stunned. You sure this is okay? Grace asked quietly. Yes, he said. It feels too nice. He smiled. You deserve nice. That night, after tucking the girls in, Sophie on top bunk, Grace below, Nate sat by the window with Martha. The city lights shimmered like faraway fireflies. She doesn't know you yet, Martha said softly, but she will. I'm not trying to replace anything, Nate replied, just trying to show up for whatever this becomes. She nodded slowly. That's what Abigail always needed. Not big gestures, just presence. He looked down at his hands. I used to think the most powerful thing I could do was build something no one could ignore. But now I think it's just sitting still, in the quiet, holding space for someone who needs it. you're learning," she whispered. Two days later, Nate entered Abigail's hospital room alone. No girls, no distractions. He brought a book she loved. He'd learned that from her journal, which he'd asked permission to read. He began to read aloud, slowly. His voice wavered at times. When he finished the first chapter, he took her hand. "You're in a better place now," he said. "But I hope one day you'll want to come back." Abigail's eyes didn't open, but her breathing shifted, softer, like she was listening. Back at the suite, Grace and Sophie built a cardboard mailbox. They labeled it Letters for Mom. Every night they wrote one. Sometimes just pictures. Sometimes confessions. Sometimes dreams. And in the mornings, Nate would find a note from one of them slipped under his door, too. One read, "Thank you for helping us not be invisible." He stared at it for a long time, and then he wept. But for once, it wasn't out of loneliness. It was because, for the first time in years, he felt seen, too. The morning started like any other. Sophie stirred pancake batter in a bowl too big for her arms while Grace tried to flip scrambled eggs without burning them. Martha stood by wearing Nate's oversized sweatshirt and humming an old gospel song under her breath. The apartment smelled of cinnamon and hope. At Mount Sinai Hospital, Nate walked the familiar hallway alone, a coffee in one hand, and in the other, a small cloth pouch Grace had insisted he bring. Inside, 3 folded paper cranes and a drawing of a sun smiling. He paused outside Abigail's room. The blinds were half open, letting slivers of light stripe the floor. Machines hummed in soft, robotic rhythm. She lay still, her face thinner now, but peaceful. Nate sat beside her, as he had done every morning for the past 2 weeks. He didn't speak immediately, just held the pouch and let the silence breathe. Then, quietly, he began reading from her favorite novel, The Secret Garden. His voice was low, steady, letting the story do its work. After 20 minutes, he stopped. Something had changed. He leaned in. Her brow had furrowed, barely, like a whisper in her skin. Her lips parted as if mid-thought. "Abigail," he said softly. No response. But then, her fingers twitched. First the pinky, then the hand, as if testing the waters of consciousness. Nate jumped to the call button, summoning the nurse. "I think..." She moved. Her hand moved. The attending nurse entered, followed by Dr. Levin, the neurospecialist on Abigail's case. They ran a light test. Simple, clinical. When they shone the penlight into her eyes, the pupils constricted, reflexive, alive. "Her brainstem reflexes are intact," Dr. Levin murmured. They adjusted the bed slightly. Abigail's eyelids fluttered. Her breathing shifted. And then, her eyes opened. It wasn't sudden, like in the movies. No dramatic gasp. Just a slow, blinking emergence, as if returning from a long and reluctant dream. She blinked twice, then looked at Nate. Her gaze was confused, swimming between dimensions, but there was recognition, and sorrow, and a flicker of something deeper. "Hey," he said, swallowing the lump in his throat. "It's okay. You're safe." She blinked again. A tear slipped down her cheek. The doctor leaned closer. "Abigail, can you hear me? Blink once for yes." She blinked. Once. Nate gripped the armrest of the chair so tightly it creaked. "Do you know where you are?" A pause. Another single blink. "Do you want to see your children?" This time her hand moved, fingers curled toward her palm. A full, silent yes. When Grace and Sophie arrived, still in their breakfast clothes, Nate met them outside the door. "She's awake," he whispered. Sophie dropped her plush rabbit. "Mommy's awake?" Grace asked, wide-eyed. He nodded. Inside, the two girls tiptoed forward. Abigail's eyes were open, tracking their movement. Her lips trembled. Grace climbed onto the edge of the bed. Sophie sat beside her. "Mommy?" Grace whispered. Abigail's lips moved, barely a sound, but clear. "You're still here." The words hit Nate like a wave. It was the same sentence Grace had written in marker on her mother's hand just a week ago. The girls leaned in, crying and laughing at once. They wrapped their arms around her gently, not caring that she couldn't hug them back yet. Martha entered moments later, covering her mouth as tears streamed down her cheeks. "She's back," she whispered to Nate. "No," Nate said, eyes never leaving the family. "She never left. We just didn't know how to hear her." Later that night, back in the suite, the girls drew pictures to hang in their mother's hospital room. Grace drew a tree with 4 roots. Sophie drew a bed with stars floating above it. And together, they wrote, "We stayed because we believed." Nate looked at the paper and felt something shift inside him, not a quake, not a collapse, but a settling, like a beam finding its foundation. It wasn't the view that mattered anymore. Nate stood in the center of his Manhattan penthouse, surrounded by windows taller than dreams. The skyline stretched endlessly, but it didn't make his chest swell the way it used to. Instead, it made his throat feel tight, like he was floating high above a life he no longer wanted. Around him, the suite was spotless, curated, silent. Too silent. In the past 2 weeks, since Abigail had woken up, he had found himself staying more and more at the hospital. He'd sleep on the visitor's cot, order takeout with the girls, spend mornings reading aloud, evenings drawing dragons with Sophie and stars with Grace. It had become routine, messy, loud, human. And for the first time in years, he didn't dread waking up. Now he looked around his old space, with its glass walls and curated loneliness, and he knew. He didn't belong here anymore. Two days later, the penthouse went on the market. His realtor nearly choked when he saw the listing email. "You sure you want to do this, Mr. Brooks? That property's worth—" "I'm sure." "No hesitation?" "Only that I didn't do it sooner." He found the house by accident, a brownstone tucked between trees near Riverside Park. 3 stories, faded red brick, a creaky porch swing. The moment he stepped inside, he could imagine the sound of little feet pounding down the stairs, the smell of burnt toast, laughter echoing in corners. The realtor looked skeptical. "It's got quirks. The banister squeaks, the attic leaks. Nothing like your last place." "Perfect," Nate said. Moving day wasn't grand. There were no assistants, no stylists, no polished furniture trucks. Just him, a rented van, and 3 excited voices waiting by the gate. Grace clutched a cereal box filled with art supplies. Sophie carried Abigail's old blanket like a flag. Abigail, still weak from therapy but radiant in a soft yellow cardigan, stepped slowly with Martha's help. Nate unlocked the front door, then stepped aside. "Ladies first." The house wasn't big. The kitchen tiles were cracked. The hallway wallpaper peeled at the corners. But to the girls, It was magic. Sophie found a loose floorboard that squeaked like a duck and declared it her favorite spot. Grace claimed the window nook upstairs for reading. Abigail touched the banister as she climbed slowly, her eyes misty. "I never thought I'd see us start again." "You're not starting alone," Nate said, offering his arm. That evening, they ate dinner on the living room floor. Paper plates, pizza slices, apple juice in mugs. A candle flickered on a crate turned into a table. The girls made a game out of who could tell the best story. Sophie's tale of a flying squirrel that fell in love with a soup spoon won. Abigail laughed so hard she had to wipe tears. Martha clinked her mug against Nate's and whispered, "Whatever you left behind wasn't worth what you've found." Nate didn't reply. He didn't need to. He just smiled and watched the firelight flicker in the girl's eyes. Later that night, while the girls were brushing their teeth with matching pink toothbrushes and Abigail folded laundry at the couch, Nate stood in front of the fridge. He carefully peeled back the protective sticker from the new white door. Then, from his jacket pocket, he pulled out the drawing. It had been crumpled and carried through too many hospital rooms and city streets. A simple image Grace had made one quiet afternoon at the hospital. 4 stick figures holding hands under a crooked roof. Scribbled above it in marker was one word: home. He smoothed it against the fridge door and pressed a magnet over it. The magnet read, "Best mistake ever made." He didn't remember where it came from. Maybe a gift shop. Maybe one of the girls found it. But now, it was perfect. Behind him, Abigail approached slowly. Her hand brushed his. "You've changed," she said gently. "No," Nate replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've remembered who I was before I got lost." She leaned into his shoulder. He didn't pull away. That night, the 4 of them lay across the floor on sleeping bags, the beds still unassembled. Sophie snuggled close to Nate's side. Grace curled against Abigail. The ceiling above was cracked, but honest. "Is this really our house now?" Grace whispered in the dark. Nate reached for her hand. "Yes. Yours as long as you want it." "What if we never want to leave?" "Then we won't," Abigail murmured. "We'll just keep painting new rooms." And in that old house with a leaky attic and a creaky banister, 4 hearts finally rested. Not in luxury, but in something far rarer: belonging. The rain had come quietly that morning, not in anger, but in hush. The kind that softened edges and made the world feel gentler than it really was. The girls were in their rain boots, splashing at the edges of Riverside Park with Martha. Inside the house, Nate was kneeling by the fireplace, stacking kindling beneath logs like it was a science experiment. He didn't notice Abigail standing behind him until she spoke. "Do you always build fires that carefully?" He turned, blinking. "Only when I don't know how to begin a conversation." She stepped closer, pulling her cardigan tighter around her waist. "Then maybe I'll start it." A pause. "Why are you here, Nate?" He smiled gently. "You know why?" "No." Her voice stayed even. "I know what you've done. You saved us. You gave us a home. You come to every therapy session. You even learned how to braid hair. Poorly, but with commitment." He chuckled softly. "But," she continued, "I've watched you look out the window when you think no one's watching, and I've seen grief in your eyes that doesn't belong to me. So I'll ask again." She stepped closer. "Are you here to love us? Or are we the echo of someone you lost? The fire crackled. Nate didn't answer right away. He set the matchbox down, sat on the floor. The rain tapped gently on the window. Then he spoke, slowly, as if the words were heavier than they appeared. When I was 19, he said, my sister tried to take her own life. Abigail's breath caught. He didn't look up. She was 17, brilliant, wild, fragile in all the places I was too blind to notice. Our parents had passed away the year before, and I was in college, trying to build something that would make them proud. I told myself I couldn't afford distractions, not even her breakdowns. His jaw tightened. The night she was hospitalized, she called me. I didn't pick up. I had a final, a networking dinner, some excuse. He swallowed hard. She survived, but our relationship didn't. Silence fell between them like ash. I spent the next 15 years building, Nate continued. Hospitals, foundations, a reputation. I told myself I was fixing things, that if I helped enough people, the weight would go away. He finally looked at Abigail. But the truth is, I wasn't helping. I was hiding, from guilt, from the phone I never answered, from the version of me that failed the one person who needed him. A long beat passed. Then I met two little girls who shouldn't have been brave enough to save a man dying in a park, he whispered, and a woman who kept breathing for her children when everyone else gave up. His voice cracked, and I realized I'd been building hospitals for strangers, but I'd never built a home. I'd built systems, but not a life. I'd donated millions, but never given anyone my presence. Abigail knelt down beside him. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, worn Polaroid, faded with time. A girl with curly dark hair stood at a piano, flashing a peace sign. A note scribbled on the bottom read, "You never come to my recitals, Nate. So here's proof I exist." I failed her, he said. But when I look at Grace and Sophie, I don't see a chance to fix the past. I see a choice to do it right this time. From the beginning. Not out of guilt, but love. He turned to Abigail, his eyes raw. I'm not here to be a savior. I'm here to be here with all of you, if you'll let me. She placed her hand on his chest, over the rhythm he thought he'd lost forever. You already are. That night, the girls fell asleep on the couch watching cartoons. Nate carried them up the stairs one by one, kissed their foreheads, and returned to the living room. Abigail was waiting by the fire. She held a small envelope in her lap. What's that? He asked. She smiled faintly. A letter I wrote for the girls when I wasn't sure I'd wake up. She handed it to him. I think you should read it too. He unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was uneven, shaky. Dear Grace and Sophie, if Mommy doesn't wake up, I want you to know you were the reason I kept fighting. Every breath, every whisper in my ear, every story you read, it stitched me back together. And if someone kind finds you, I hope they see how brave you are, how funny, how full of light. And if that someone stays, not just for a moment, but truly stays, then maybe you'll teach him, like you taught me, what it means to fight for joy. Tears blurred Nate's vision. I don't deserve them, he whispered. No one earns love, Abigail replied. We just have to be brave enough to receive it. That night, When he finally lay down in the guest room with its crooked floor and soft mattress, Nate felt something he hadn't felt in 2 decades. Peace. Not because the past had disappeared, but because, for the first time, he wasn't running from it. He was walking into something new. Not to fix, not to prove, but to belong. And somewhere, in the quiet rhythm of the rain, he swore he could hear a younger version of himself whispering, "You finally came home." Central Park glowed beneath the late July sun, golden light spilling like honey between the trees. The fountains near Bethesda Terrace sparkled in the breeze, tourists snapping photos while joggers passed with earbuds and sweatbands, oblivious to the quieter miracle happening under a sycamore tree. Nate was there. Not in a suit, not with bodyguards or urgency, just in jeans, a soft button-up shirt Grace had chosen for him. You look like a math teacher, but a cool one, and a tired but peaceful expression that came from belonging. On the picnic blanket beside him, Sophie was stacking her sandwich crusts into a tiny sculpture, whispering, "It's modern art." Grace rolled her eyes and poked her twin with a carrot stick. Nearby, Abigail sat in a foldable chair, a blanket around her shoulders even though the sun was warm. Her legs weren't fully steady yet, but she was getting stronger every day. That day, she walked to the fountain with no wheelchair, just Nate's steady arm. "It's strange," she whispered now, watching the girls. "This is where the world ignored you, remember? And now, look." Nate followed her gaze. 2 children laughing, a mother healing, a stranger no longer a stranger. "They didn't," he said quietly. "Not everyone ignored me." Sophie overheard. She turned, pointing dramatically toward the fountain. "That," she said loudly, "is the place where nobody helped you, except us." Abigail chuckled. "Don't let her rewrite history," she said. "She's 6. "She's not wrong," Nate smiled. The girls came tumbling onto the blanket. "We brought dessert," Grace announced, pulling out 2 slightly melted popsicles and a pack of peanut butter crackers. "You know," Nate mused, "when I was a kid, I thought a happy ending meant everything got fixed. Like magic." "And now?" Abigail asked. He leaned back, letting the breeze touch his face. "Now I think a happy ending is just choosing not to walk away, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." Sophie climbed into his lap, sticky popsicle and all. "Are we a happy ending?" she asked. Nate looked at her. He thought of all the boardrooms he'd sat in, the $1 million contracts, the speeches at charity galas. He thought of cold apartments with smart thermostats and silent nights filled with noise in his head. And then he thought of this moment. Warmth, mess, small laughter, soft breathing. "No," he said. The girls blinked. "You're not a happy ending." He kissed the top of Sophie's head. "You're a beautiful beginning." That evening, as the sun dipped low, they didn't rush home. The girls danced barefoot in the grass while a nearby guitarist played something slow and jazzy. Abigail leaned her head on Nate's shoulder. "I don't remember what hope felt like before," she whispered. He wrapped his arm around her. "It's this." Later, when the stars came out, they walked slowly back to the same fountain. The girls were tired now, resting their heads against Nate's side, hands still sticky from marshmallows. They paused there, just as they had that first day, months ago, when his world ended at the feet of a hot dog stand. This time, no sirens, no concrete pressing against his ribs, just sky, water, laughter. Grace looked up. "Can we come back every year?" To this fountain? Nate asked. No, Sophie yawned. To this exact minute. He swallowed the lump in his throat. We'll try, he said, with all we have. Then, in the quietest voice, as the city lights shimmered on the fountain's surface, Abigail whispered, You're not alone anymore, Nate. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. He simply held them tighter. That night, back at the small house by Riverside Park, the girls fell asleep first. Nate tucked them in, adjusting their blanket, the one they'd painted with handprints and hearts and a wobbly signature, Family equals 4. Abigail stood in the doorway. They'll remember this, she said. This year. This night. You. He nodded, throat too tight to reply. Outside, fireworks began, small and local, popping like laughter across the sky. Nate turned to Abigail, offered his hand. Come sit by the window, he said. Let's not miss it. They sat on the floor by the open pane, shoulders touching. As the final bursts of light colored the sky, he thought, not every story ends with a miracle. But sometimes, it ends with someone staying. And in that staying, something stronger than any miracle is born. Home.